They dared Susan Davis to sing at the spring showcase as a joke. "The weird redhead won't even make it to the microphone," Diana Wellington sneered to her group of friends. But when 13-year-old Susan finally stepped onto that stage in her flowery dress, what happened next left the entire auditorium breathless. Spring, 1962, Millfield, Ohio. The maple trees along Orchard Street had just started to bloom. Susan Claire Davis walked home from Roosevelt Middle School, her worn leather satchel clutched tightly to her side, its strap pulling at the fabric of her floral dress. Her copper-red ponytail bounced with each determined step. Susan wasn't like the other 8th grade girls. While they clustered in giggling groups, gossiping about movie stars and copying dance moves from TV, she usually sat alone at lunch, her nose buried in a book. Her dresses, lovingly handmade by her mother, stood out in a world that favored store-bought fashion. "Susie, is that you?" her mother called as the screen door creaked open behind her. "Yes, Mom," Susan replied, setting her satchel on the kitchen table and breathing in the warm scent of apple pie baking in the oven. Helen Davis wiped flour-covered hands on her apron and studied her daughter's face. "How was school?" Susan shrugged. "Fine." That one word, as always, carried more than it revealed. School was never just fine, not with Diana Wellington roaming the halls, her cutting remarks trailing behind her like smoke. "Your grandpa called," Helen said, gently changing the subject. "He's coming for dinner on Sunday." Susan's face lit up. "Grandpa Will's coming?" William Davis, her father's father, was the only one who truly understood her. A former jazz musician who'd once played smoky clubs across the Midwest, he had passed on his love of music to Susan during summer visits. While her parents knew she liked to sing, only Grandpa Will had ever heard what she could really do when no one else was around. Alone in her room that evening, Susan closed the door tight, dropped the needle on her record player, and let Ella Fitzgerald's voice spill into the room. Slowly, softly, she began to sing along. Her voice, at first tentative, grew stronger, warmer, clearer, rich with feeling far beyond her 13 years. In those private moments, Susan wasn't the quiet girl from Roosevelt Middle School. She was someone else, confident, powerful, free. But when the record ended, so did the magic. Tomorrow would mean dodging sneers in the hallway again, trying to stay invisible. If only she could feel like that other Susan, even just once. In front of everyone. 2 weeks before the spring showcase, Mrs. Peterson tapped her wooden ruler against the chalkboard. The classroom fell silent. As you all know, the annual spring showcase is just around the corner. Sign-ups close this Friday. Susan barely looked up, doodling musical notes in the margin of her notebook. The showcase was Roosevelt Middle's biggest event, a night of performances for students, parents, and teachers. She had never once considered participating. The idea of standing on stage made her stomach twist. Up front, Diana Wellington raised her perfectly manicured hand. "Mrs. Peterson, my mother is donating refreshments again this year. Will chocolate chip cookies be okay?" "How thoughtful, Diana. Please thank your mother," the teacher replied. Diana turned in her seat and met Susan's eyes with a syrupy smile that didn't reach her eyes. Susan quickly looked away. "I heard Diana's doing a dance routine. With Betty and Linda," Sarah Mitchell whispered from the neighboring desk. "Susan's only real friend. They've been practicing for weeks." After class, Susan hurried to her locker, hoping to avoid the usual taunts. No such luck. "Well, if it isn't Susie Songbird," Diana's voice rang out, echoing through the hallway. She leaned against the lockers, flanked by Betty and Linda, a trio of matching cardigans and cruel smiles. "We never see you at school events," Diana said, voice sweet and sharp. "Too good for the rest of us?" "I just don't like performing," Susan muttered, fumbling with her locker. "Oh, really?" Diana arched an eyebrow. "That's not what I heard." Susan froze. "What do you mean?" "Chuck said he heard you singing in the music room after school yesterday. Said it sounded like a dying cat." The girls burst into laughter. Heat rushed to Susan's face. She had thought she was alone, and she always made sure. "You should definitely sign up for the showcase," Betty added mockingly. We could use some comic relief between the serious acts. More laughter. A few students slowed to watch. I'm not interested, Susan mumbled, finally yanking open her locker. What's wrong, Susie? Scared? Diana pressed, her smile widening. You wanted to be a famous singer someday, didn't you? Isn't that what you wrote in Mrs. Peterson's Dreams and Aspirations assignment? Susan's heart dropped. That assignment was supposed to be private. How did Diana know? Maybe she just needs a little encouragement, Diana said sweetly, eyes gleaming with mischief. In fact, I think I know exactly how to help our shy friend shine. The next morning, Susan opened her locker and froze. Taped to the inside was the official spring showcase sign-up sheet. Her name was already on it, under vocal performance. The handwriting was unmistakably Diana's. You can't just sign me up without asking. Susan confronted her at lunch, her voice low but firm, anger mixing with embarrassment. Diana feigned innocence, twirling a strand of hair around her finger. I was doing you a favor, Susie. Everyone deserves a chance to share their talents. The pause before the last word made Susan's skin crawl. I'm going to tell Mrs. Whitmore I didn't sign up, she said quietly. Diana shrugged. Go ahead. But I already told her how excited you were. She was thrilled, said, It's about time you came out of your shell. Susan felt the blood drain from her face. Mrs. Evelyn Whitmore, the most respected teacher at Roosevelt, was a former opera singer who'd once given up a promising career to teach. Susan had admired her from afar for years. You told her what? Susan whispered, her voice catching. I said you were nervous but ready. She seemed really proud. Diana leaned in. Would you really want to disappoint her now? That afternoon, Susan stood outside the music room, her heart pounding. Through the open door, she saw Mrs. Whitmore sorting sheet music, her salt and pepper hair swept into an elegant bun, reading glasses balanced on her nose. Susan knocked gently. Yes? The teacher said, looking up. Her face broke into a warm smile. Oh, Susan Davis, isn't it? Diana mentioned you'd be stopping by. I'm so delighted you're joining the showcase this year. About that, Mrs. Whitmore, Susan started, her voice trailing off. Have you selected your piece yet? We'll need it for the program. I haven't decided, Susan stammered. No rush, but don't wait too long. Rehearsals start next week. Mrs. Whitmore smiled. It's always wonderful to see quiet students step into the spotlight. They often surprise us the most. Susan felt her resistance crumble beneath the teacher's genuine kindness. She wanted to tell her the truth, to say her name had been submitted as a cruel prank. But all she managed was, thank you. She backed out of the room, her stomach in knots. That evening, Susan paced her bedroom, her nerves fraying with every step. Sarah had called. Word had already spread. Everyone's talking about it, she said. Diana's telling people your performance is going to be the highlight of the night. But the way she says it, Susan, I don't think she means it as a compliment. Susan sat down hard, on her bed, head in her hands. She wants me to humiliate myself in front of the whole school. You could still back out, Sarah offered gently. And prove her right, Susan murmured. That I'm too scared? Too weird? Too nothing? She hugged a pillow tightly to her chest, her mind spiraling. Sunday dinner at the Davis house was unusually quiet. Susan pushed mashed potatoes around her plate, her appetite gone. Even her father's usual jokes about the hardware store couldn't lift her spirits. You're awfully quiet today, Songbird, Grandpa Will said, resting his weathered hand over hers. At 72, William Davis still had the sharp eyes and steady presence of a man who'd lived a life full of music and stories. Just thinking about school, Susan replied vaguely. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Grandpa Will beckoned her onto the front porch swing. The air smelled of lilacs and freshly cut grass. Your mother mentioned there's a talent show coming up, he said. Susan sighed. The spring showcase. It's not really a big deal. But something about it's bothering you, he said, not as a question but a fact. And just like that, the story came spilling out. Diana's setup, Mrs. Whitmore's encouragement, the awful trap she felt caught in, between the fear of humiliating herself and the guilt of letting someone she admired down. The worst part is, Susan finished quietly, Diana's right. I can't sing in front of people. I freeze. I just can't. Grandpa Will rocked the swing gently. You know, he began, when I first started playing in clubs, I was terrified, hands shaking so bad I could barely hold my trumpet. Susan blinked. You? Scared? Petrified. First night in Chicago, 1933, I nearly caught the next train home. So what happened? My band leader, tough old fellow named Marcus, told me something I never forgot. He said, Will, when you play for yourself, that's practice. When you play for others, that's a gift. He smiled at the memory. That changed everything. It wasn't about how I felt anymore. It was about what I had to give. They sat in silence for a moment, the swing creaking softly beneath them. What if they laugh at me? Susan whispered, voicing her deepest fear. They might, Grandpa Will said, surprising her with his honesty. But here's what I know, Susan Claire Davis. When you sing, really sing, nobody laughs. I've heard you. That voice of yours, it's not something people forget. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver pin shaped like a music note. This was mine, from back in the day. I think it's time it had a new owner. A good luck charm for 30 years of performances, Grandpa Will said, placing the small silver music note pin in Susan's hand. Might be time it found a new owner. As the pin caught the last golden rays of sunset, something inside Susan shifted. She made her decision. She would perform, not for Diana, not even for Mrs. Whitmore, but for herself, and for the grandfather who believed in her voice before anyone else had ever heard it. Thank you, she whispered, closing her fingers around the pin. I think I know what song I'm going to sing. The days leading up to the spring showcase passed in a blur of nerves and determination. Susan had chosen Over the Rainbow, a song her grandfather used to play while she sang during those warm summer visits. Its message of longing and hope spoke to something deep within her. Each afternoon she practiced in the school music room under Mrs. Whitmore's sharp but encouraging eye. You have a gift, Susan, the teacher said during their third rehearsal. But you're holding back. Let go of whatever is keeping your voice trapped. Let the world hear you. Diana and her entourage made no effort to hide their smug anticipation. They would stroll past the music room, giggling into their palms, tossing glances designed to shake Susan's confidence. Just ignore them, Mrs. Whitmore advised firmly. Focus on the music. That's all that matters. At home, Susan practiced in front of her bedroom mirror, Grandpa Will's pin carefully fastened to her dress. Sometimes her voice cracked, her nerves fraying. Other times, when she imagined she was singing only for herself, her voice soared, pure and full. The night before the showcase, Susan called Sarah in a quiet panic. I can't do this, she whispered, glancing down the hall to make sure her parents were asleep. Everyone will be watching. Diana's probably invited the whole school just to see me crash and burn. Then don't let her win, Sarah replied without hesitation. You've never let me hear you sing, but if Mrs. Whitmore thinks you've got something special, she's probably right. It's one thing to sing in a practice room. On stage, Diana, it's different. Imagine everyone in their underwear, Sarah offered gently. Despite the anxiety twisting in her chest, Susan laughed. That's not helping. The morning of the showcase dawned with clear skies and warm spring sunshine. Susan's mother had stayed up late putting the finishing touches on her dress, a pale yellow fabric with tiny floral patterns, puffed sleeves, and a Peter Pan collar. You look beautiful, honey, her mother said, helping her with the buttons. Her father cleared his throat, voice thick. Your grandpa's already saved us front row seats. As they drove to the school, Susan's hands trembled in her lap. The silver music note glinted in the sunlight, and she touched it gently, drawing strength from its familiar, smooth shape. Roosevelt. Middle's auditorium buzzed with excitement. Families filled the seats, Students clustered backstage in a blur of last-minute preparations. Diana and her friends practiced their dance routine in matching blue sequined outfits, confident and flawless. Susan peeked through the curtain and instantly regretted it. A sea of faces, so many eyes. Her breath caught. 10 minutes to curtain. Mrs. Whitmore called out, clipboard in hand. She caught Susan's gaze and offered a calm, steady nod. This was it. No turning back. The showcase began with a warm welcome from Principal Sullivan, followed by a clarinet solo, a poetry reading, and even an impressive yo-yo routine. With each performance, Susan's nerves grew tighter, her pacing more frantic. Backstage, she mouthed the lyrics over and over, one hand gripping the silver pin like a lifeline. Diana's dance number was just before hers. She appeared beside Susan, dazzling in blue sequins. Nervous? Diana asked sweetly. Don't worry. We're all so excited to hear your unique interpretation. Before Susan could reply, Diana's name was called. The music kicked, a high-energy pop track, and Diana, Betty, and Linda lit up the stage with a perfectly synchronized routine. The audience clapped along, clearly impressed. Diana took an extra bow, drinking in the applause. Susan Davis, you're up. Next, Mrs. Whitmore said gently, checking her clipboard. Susan's mouth went dry. The air felt thin. Mrs. Whitmore straightened the collar on her dress. Remember, it's just you and the music. Everything else is background noise. Numbly, Susan nodded and moved toward the stage. Through the curtain, she spotted Diana leaning over to whisper to a group of boys in the front row. They smirked and glanced her way. But behind them, she saw her parents and Grandpa Will, smiling up at her with quiet encouragement. And now, Principal Sullivan's voice echoed, Susan Davis will perform over the rainbow. The curtain opened. Susan stepped forward, the stage lights warming her skin, her yellow dress glowing under their shine. The microphone stood waiting, a silent challenge. A few murmurs fluttered through the crowd. She spotted Diana's friends, perfectly spaced in the audience, their expressions expectant, and not in a kind way. Susan took a breath. Her fingers brushed the silver note at her collar. When you sing, truly sing, nobody laughs. She closed her eyes and began. The auditorium fell quiet as the piano introduction began. Susan stood just off center stage, exchanging a final meaningful glance with her grandfather. Her cue was seconds away. Then her mind went completely blank. When she opened her mouth, no sound came out. For a terrible moment, time stopped. From the corner of her eye, she saw Diana lean forward in her seat, a flicker of expectation. Or was it anticipation on her face? Susan's heart pounded. Her throat felt like sandpaper. Panic surged, and then, as if guided by instinct, she reached up and touched the silver music note pinned to her dress. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath. When you sing for others, she remembered her grandfather telling her once, it becomes a gift. She opened her mouth again. This time, the first notes came, soft and hesitant. But as the familiar melody wrapped itself around her, something shifted. She opened her eyes. The individual faces in the crowd blurred together. Her voice grew stronger, steadier, each phrase building on the last, clear, confident, full of everything she had ever wanted to say but never had the courage to speak aloud. The room held its breath. The whispers stopped. The fidgeting ceased. Even the ever-present coughing that usually punctuated school events fell away. There was only her voice, soaring and dipping, telling a story of longing, of dreams, of skies beyond rainbows. As she approached the emotional climax, her voice took on a richness that surprised even her. It was no longer just well-rehearsed, it was effortless, expressive, alive. And when she held the final note, it rang out with perfect clarity, then gently faded into silence. For one suspended heartbeat, the auditorium remained utterly still, and then from the back someone clapped once, twice, it spread like a wave. Another joined in, then another, until the entire room erupted in thunderous applause. People were rising to their feet. First her grandfather, tears glistening openly on his weathered cheeks. Then her parents. Then row after row of students, teachers, and families. The ovation didn't fade. It built, louder, longer, stronger. Susan stood frozen in the spotlight, breathless and overwhelmed. This wasn't polite applause. This was awe. From the stage, she caught a glimpse of Diana's face in the audience. Wide-eyed, stunned disbelief written across her features. Betty and Linda looked equally floored. Even Diana's brother was on his feet, clapping enthusiastically. Principal Sullivan returned to the microphone, needing to speak several times before the crowd settled. "Well," he said, clearly moved, "I think we've just witnessed something extraordinary. Thank you, Susan." Backstage, students she barely knew stopped her to offer congratulations. Sarah practically launched herself into a hug. "That was incredible. Why didn't you ever tell me you could sing like that?" Before Susan could answer, Mrs. Whitmore stepped forward, her usual composed demeanor cracked with emotion. "In 30 years of teaching," she said softly, "I've never heard a voice like yours. Susan, with proper training, there's no telling what you could become. You must keep going." Nearby, Diana hovered uncertainly. Susan met her gaze, bracing for an eye roll or dismissive comment. But instead she saw something unexpected. Confusion, humility, maybe even a touch of reluctant admiration. I didn't know," Diana said finally, her voice small. "Nobody did. I mean, you can really sing." Susan didn't gloat. She didn't sneer. Instead, she nodded, her voice steady and sure. "There's probably a lot you don't know about me, Diana." After the showcase, families gathered in the gym for refreshments. Susan found herself the center of attention, receiving compliments from parents and teachers she'd never even spoken to. A few students asked if she'd perform at future events. Grandpa Will made his way through the crowd to her side, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I told you," he said, voice full of quiet pride. "It's a gift." Susan nodded, the truth of it finally sinking in. She felt different, changed. The girl who had walked into the auditorium earlier that evening wasn't the one standing here now. She had found more than just her voice. She had found herself. "What happens now?" she asked her grandfather. He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Now, songbird. Now you fly." Monday morning arrived with a strange, dreamlike quality. Roosevelt Middle felt unfamiliar, like a place she was seeing through new eyes. As she walked through the hallways, conversations paused, heads turned, but for once the whispers that followed her weren't mocking. "There she is," someone murmured. "The girl with the voice." Sarah walked beside her, grinning. "You're practically famous now." "It feels weird," Susan admitted, juggling her books at her locker. Waiting nearby was Diana. She shifted on her feet, clearly uncomfortable, her usual confidence absent. "Hi, Susan," she said, using her full name for perhaps the first time. "I wanted to talk." Susan stiffened, uncertain of what would come next. "What I did," Diana began slowly, "was mean. I set you up, tried to embarrass you. I thought, well, it doesn't matter what I thought. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." The apology was awkward, clearly hard-won, but it felt real. "Thank you for saying that," Susan replied softly. An uneasy silence stretched between them. Years of distance, rivalry, misunderstanding compressed into a moment. Then, with the faintest of smiles, Susan turned back to her locker. The hierarchy at Roosevelt Middle had shifted, subtly, but unmistakably, all because of one unforgettable performance. "Mrs. Whitmore is starting a special vocal ensemble," Diana said one afternoon, approaching Susan by her locker. "She asked me to let you know. Auditions are next week, but she said your spot's already reserved if you want it." With that, Diana gave a small, genuine smile before walking away. No sarcasm, no eye rolls, just sincerity. After she left, Susan opened her locker and spotted the newspaper clipping someone had taped inside. It was from the local paper's review of the spring showcase. The unexpected highlight of the evening came from 8th grader Susan Davis, whose rendition of Over the Rainbow displayed vocal maturity well beyond her years. That afternoon, Mrs. Whitmore confirmed the news. "We'll be performing at regional competitions," she said, eyes alight with enthusiasm. "It's an incredible chance for you to grow, not just as a singer, but as an artist." In the weeks that followed, Susan's world quietly transformed. Rehearsals with the vocal ensemble became the highlight of her week. She found herself surrounded by students who didn't just admire her, they understood her. They shared her love for music, her desire to create something beautiful. Real friendships blossomed, ones built on mutual respect rather than social standing. As for Diana, she never became a close friend. But the rivalry faded. In its place was something calmer, more honest, a quiet truce that occasionally touched the edges of friendship. At every performance, Susan wore the silver music note pinned proudly to her dress, a small symbol of something larger, a reminder of the moment she realized that the voice she had once hidden was, in fact, her greatest strength. Because sometimes the brightest talents emerge from the quietest places. Sometimes, all it takes is the courage to step into the light and simply begin. Have you ever been underestimated only to surprise everyone with what you could do? Susan's journey is proof that the most powerful response to doubt and ridicule is to show up, fully unapologetically, and reveal your true self. If this story touched your heart, tap the like button and subscribe for more uplifting tales of courage, growth, and unexpected triumphs. Where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments, and feel free to share a time when you or someone you know proved the doubters wrong. Until next time, remember, your talents are gifts, and the world is waiting to hear you.